That spring is a clear violation of Creekwood Estates' aesthetic water management protocols, and you will cap it immediately, or I will have it filled with concrete and bill you for the demolition. The voice was a grating symphony of entitlement, a sound that scraped against the placid afternoon air like nails on a slate roof. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you think this is insane, hit that subscribe button right now and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've got your own HOA nightmare story, I definitely want to hear about it. Now let me tell you how this all started. I was on my own land, replacing a section of wire fence that had seen better decades. The property, which my family has called Whispering Pines for over a century, is a rolling tract of timber and pasture land in the foothills. Its heart, its literal and spiritual center, is a natural spring that bubbles up from the earth, cool and clear, feeding a small creek that meanders through the woods before finding its way to the county drainage system. I retired here after 30 years with the Army Corps of Engineers. My final rank was colonel. I came here for the silence, for the familiar scent of pine and damp earth, for the profound peace that comes from being the sole steward of a place your great-grandfather tamed with his own two hands. That peace was being methodically dismantled. Next to my rambling, imperfect acreage, a new subdivision had metastasized. It was called Creekwood Estates, a name that was both an appropriation and an insult, as the very creek it was named for originated on my land. The development was a sterile grid of identical beige houses with aggressively manicured lawns, a monument to aesthetic conformity. It was everything my property was not. New, artificial, and governed by a thick book of rules designed to stamp out any flicker of individuality. And the woman who had just delivered the ultimatum was the high priestess of this beige cult. She sat astride a golf cart, the official chariot of petty tyrants everywhere, its tires just inches from my property line. Her name, I would soon learn, was Karen Miller, and she was the president of the Homeowners Association. She was an ample woman, poured into a polo shirt 2 sizes too small, the fabric straining at the seams. Her face was a mask of belligerent certainty, her eyes small and hard. She looked at my spring, a source of life and history, and saw only a nuisance, a messy deviation from her master plan. I finished tightening a fence staple with a slow, deliberate tap of my hammer before I turned to face her fully. I did not step toward her. I remained on my side of the wire. In any engagement, you hold your ground. Ma'am, I said, my voice level. This is private property, and that spring has been here longer than this state has been a state. Your property abuts Creekwood Estates, she retorted, gesturing with a dismissive flick of her wrist toward the rows of identical houses behind her. And your spring is creating an unauthorized runoff into our community's designated drainage culvert. It's unsightly, it breeds mosquitoes, and it violates Section 7, subsection B, paragraph 4 of the CC&Rs. The covenants, conditions, and restrictions, she added, as if I were a simpleton who couldn't possibly grasp such a lofty concept. I knew about their drainage culvert. It was a concrete-lined ditch that ran along the boundary line. My great-grandfather's hand-dug ditch had been in that exact spot, serving the same purpose, for 90 years before their developers arrived, tore it up, and replaced it with their sterile version. The water from my spring had fed that ditch for a century. My spring and my land are not subject to your CC&RS, I said, the acronym feeling alien and absurd on my tongue. This farm predates your entire development. It is not and has never been part of your association. This was a simple, verifiable fact, the kind of fact that forms the bedrock of any sound strategic position. Karen Miller scoffed, a short, sharp burst of air. That's a matter of interpretation, and as president of the board, I am the final arbiter of that interpretation. You are creating a nuisance. You have been warned. She pulled a small, laminated card from the polo shirt's pocket. This is my official contact information. You have 14 days to bring your property into compliance. After that, we will take remedial action. She didn't hand the card to me. She tossed it onto the ground on her side of the fence. It was a calculated gesture of contempt. A power play. Without another word, she jammed the golf cart's accelerator, and the whining electric motor carried her away, leaving a faint smell of cheap perfume and ozone in the quiet air. I looked down at the laminated card lying in the dust. Then I looked at the spring, its water glinting in the sun as it had for generations. A slow, dangerous calm settled over me. The kind of calm I used to feel in a command tent just before the commencement of a complex operation. The peace I had retired to was under siege. The campaign had just begun. A few days later, the first written salvo arrived. It was not a simple letter. It was a declaration of war, packaged in a thick, cream-colored envelope. The paper felt heavy, expensive, meant to convey an unearned gravitas. In the top left corner, an embossed logo, a vaguely fascistic-looking eagle clutching a laurel wreath, with the words, Creekwood Estates Homeowners Association, arranged in a severe arc above it. The return address was a post office box, a classic sign of an organization that wants to dish out dictates without being easily reachable. I slit the envelope with a letter opener from my desk, a brass replica of a cavalry saber. The document inside was printed on the same heavy bond paper. The heading, in an ornate Gothic font, read, Official Notice of Covenant Violation and Fine Assessment. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic aggression. It listed not one, but 3 separate violations. Violation number 1, unauthorized water discharge, Section 7B, Paragraph 4, referencing the spring. Violation number 2, unmaintained property border, Section 9A, Paragraph 2, referencing the century-old, perfectly functional wire fence she had accosted me at. Violation number 3, creation of a public nuisance, Section 12C, Paragraph 1, a catch-all charge that could mean anything. Each violation carried a fine of $500, for a total of $1,500. An additional administrative processing fee of $250 was tacked on at the bottom. The total demanded was $1,750, payable within 30 days, after which further penalties and legal action would be pursued. I read the document twice. My initial shock, a hot flash of indignation, quickly cooled and hardened into something else. It was the familiar feeling of analyzing an enemy's capabilities and intentions. She wasn't just trying to bully me. She was trying to build a paper trail. She was fabricating a legal justification for the remedial action she had threatened. This was not a simple dispute. This was a siege. I stood up and walked from my kitchen to my study. It was a room paneled in dark wood, filled with books on engineering, history, and geology. On a bottom shelf, behind a row of survey manuals, were the tools of my former trade, not the ones for building bridges, but the ones for managing complex, multi-front campaigns. I pulled out a heavy-duty 3-ring binder, black, unmarked. I took it back to the kitchen table. From a drawer, I retrieved a label maker. I typed slowly, deliberately. The machine spit out a clean, white strip of text. Operation Spring Freedom. I affixed the label squarely to the binder's spine. I 3-hole punched the violation notice, the thick paper resisting with a satisfying crunch. I slid it into a clear plastic sleeve and clipped it into the binder. It was the first piece of enemy communication, the first entry in what I knew would become a comprehensive field manual for the coming conflict. This wasn't about anger anymore. This was about logistics, intelligence, and overwhelming force. Karen Miller had declared war on my peace and quiet. I would answer with a meticulously planned, professionally executed campaign of annihilation. The first phase of any operation is reconnaissance. You do not engage the enemy until you know the terrain, their strength, their weaknesses, and most importantly, the rules by which they are bound. Karen Miller had thrown her rulebook at me. It was time I read it more closely than she ever had. Getting a copy of the Creekwood Estates covenants, conditions, and restrictions was simple. All such documents are public record, filed with the county clerk's office. A quick trip into town and a small copying fee yielded a document that was 57 pages long. It was a dense forest of legalese, a testament to the desire to control every conceivable aspect of a homeowner's life, from the color of their mailbox to the breed of their dog. I spent an entire evening at my desk, a pot of strong coffee at my elbow, dissecting it. I did not read it as a homeowner. I read it as a counterintelligence officer would read a captured enemy codebook. I used 3 different colored highlighters: yellow for procedural requirements the board had to follow, pink for definitions and jurisdictional clauses, orange for potential contradictions or liabilities. By midnight, the pages were a riot of color. Karen had made several critical errors in her initial assault. The CC&Rs, for all their bluster, were very specific about jurisdiction. They stated, in no uncertain terms, that their authority applied only to lots and properties designated as part of the Creekwood Estates plat, as filed with the county. My land was not on that plat. This was the foundational weakness of her entire position. Furthermore, the section on levying fines was a procedural minefield. It required a written warning, a 30-day cure period, and then a formal hearing before a fine could be assessed. She had conflated the warning and the fine into a single document, a clear violation of her own bylaws. It was a sloppy move, born of arrogance. The next morning, I escalated my intelligence gathering from the tactical to the strategic level. I drove back to the county records office. This time, I requested the original plat maps for my farm and for the Creekwood Estates subdivision. The clerk, a kindly woman with a formidable knowledge of the archives, helped me pull the massive linen-backed documents. I unrolled them on a large table. There it was, in crisp black ink from 1923. The survey of my family's land, its boundaries clearly defined. And there, on a much newer map, was the layout of Creekwood Estates. The 2 properties abutted, but they were legally distinct entities, as separate as 2 different countries. But then I found the real prize, the smoking gun. I traced the boundary line where the disputed drainage ditch ran. There, clearly marked on both my plat and the subdivision's plat, was a notation: 20-foot county drainage easement. I followed the reference number to another file. It was an easement my grandfather had granted to the county in 1968, allowing them to maintain a drainage path for stormwater. The ownership of the land itself, all 20 feet of it, remained with my property. The ditch was not their culvert. It was my land, burdened by an easement granted to the county, not to a non-existent HOA. Karen Miller was trying to enforce her imaginary rules on my property under the guise of managing a utility that wasn't even hers to manage. I had a cartographer's copy made of both plats and the easement document. These went into the binder for Operation Spring Freedom, each in its own protective sleeve. My kill box was becoming more clearly defined. Now it was time to bring in air support. a higher authority. Back in my study, I looked up the number for the State Department of Environmental Protection. Navigating the phone tree was its own war of attrition, but I eventually reached a human being, a man whose voice radiated the profound weariness of a long-serving bureaucrat. DEP Water Management Division. This is Ron, he mumbled. I kept my report concise and factual. Good morning, Ron. My name is Arthur Morgan. I am calling to report an attempt to illegally interfere with a natural spring located on my property. An HOA, you said? Ron's voice sharpened. A flicker of interest cut through the bureaucratic fog. And they're demanding you do what? They are demanding I cap it. Their term. They have threatened to fill it with concrete if I do not comply. There was a pause on the line, followed by a low whistle. Okay. Wow. They can't do that. That's a significant violation of state environmental code. A natural spring is part of the state's water resources. Tampering with it is a Class 1 environmental infraction. Fines for that start in the 5-figure range and go up steeply. The weariness in his voice was gone, replaced by the keen focus of a predator that has caught a scent. Mr. Morgan, can you give me the address of your property and the name of this homeowners association? I gave him the information. I could hear him typing vigorously. Okay, I've opened a case file, he said. Number EWM 7749. I'm issuing an official advisory notice to this Karen Miller and the Creekwood Estates Board. It will inform them that the spring is under state protection and that any attempt to alter, impede, or destroy it will be met with the full force of this department's legal and financial powers. You, sir, have just become a material witness in a state environmental case. I wrote down the case number. It was another crucial piece of ordnance for my arsenal. Thank you, Ron, I said. You've been very helpful. No, thank you, Mr. Morgan, he replied. And for the first time, I heard a hint of a smile in his voice. This is going to be an interesting week. With my legal and environmental flanks secured, it was time to build a ground force, an insurgency. I knew from my initial observations that Karen Miller's tyranny was not limited to me. A leader who rules by fear always creates a populace ripe for rebellion. They just need a catalyst, a figure to rally around. I decided to take a walk, not through my woods, but through the beige labyrinth of Creekwood Estates. It was late afternoon, and the neighborhood was quiet, almost unnaturally so. It felt like a model village, not a place where people actually lived. My first target was an elderly woman I had seen in her yard a few days prior, tending to a small rose garden. I saw her again, this time kneeling by her front walkway, sadly packing a small, whimsical bird bath into a cardboard box. Her name, I soon learned, was Mrs. Gable. She had lived in the area for 40 years, long before Creekwood Estates existed, having sold her original home to the developers and downsized into one of the new builds. Good afternoon, I said, stopping on the public sidewalk. That's a lovely bird bath. She looked up, her eyes watery. It was a gift from my late husband, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But it's not on the approved list of lawn ornaments. Karen, Mrs. Miller, said if I didn't remove it by today, I'd be fined $200. The approved list? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Yes. We're only allowed to have the stone fountain from the catalog, or a gazing ball, but only in silver or dark blue. She sighed, taping the box shut. It's just not worth the fight. She's got everyone on the board in her pocket. You cross her once and she never lets up. Fines for everything. Lawn too long, garbage cans out 10 minutes too early. It never ends. I listened. I nodded. I'm sorry to hear that, Mrs. Gable, I said. My name is Arthur Morgan. I live on the old farm property just over the hill. Her eyes widened slightly. You're the one she's been complaining about. The one with the creek. The spring, yes, I corrected gently. She seems to have taken an interest in my property. Oh, be careful, she whispered, leaning closer. She's a vindictive woman. She tried to get the board to sue the post office last year because the mail truck left tire tracks on the verge. I filed that piece of intelligence away. A history of frivolous, aggressive action. A pattern. Thank you for the warning, I said. And for what it's worth, I think that bird bath is a beautiful tribute. I left her to her sad task and continued my walk. A few streets over, I saw a young family, the Martinezes, in their driveway. The father was trying to disassemble a brightly colored plastic playset, while his two small children watched with forlorn faces. I approached them in the same manner. Quite a project you've got there, I offered. The father, a man in his 30s named Carlos Martinez, sighed in exasperation. Tell me about it. We got a final notice. Apparently, primary colors are visually disruptive to the community's neutral palette. We have to replace it with one of the pre-approved wooden swing sets, the ones that cost 3 times as much and give you splinters just by looking at them. His wife, Maria, came out of the house, holding a piece of paper. It was another one of Karen's official notices, printed on that same heavy, cream-colored stock. She even fined us for the basketball hoop over the garage, Maria said, her voice a mixture of anger and resignation. Said it encourages unseemly street gatherings. Our son is 8. He just wants to shoot hoops in his own driveway. We tried to fight it at the last meeting, Carlos added, wiping sweat from his brow. She just talked over us, quoted the rule book, and had the board vote to uphold the fine. It's impossible. It's her little kingdom. I listened to their story, just as I had listened to Mrs. Gable's. I didn't offer solutions or promise a revolution. Not yet. I simply bore witness. I gathered their stories, their pain, their frustration. These were not just anecdotes. They were evidence. They were the human cost of Karen Miller's reign. My name is Arthur Morgan, I said finally. I'm your neighbor to the west, the one with the farm. Recognition dawned on their faces as well. I'm currently engaged in a disagreement with Mrs. Miller myself, I said carefully. I'm finding that a methodical approach can be very effective. Documentation is key. I looked from Carlos to Maria to their disappointed children. You're not alone in this, I said, and the simple statement seemed to land with surprising weight. I had planted the first seeds of an insurgency. I had given them a name and a face to associate with resistance. Now, I needed to bring in the heavy artillery. My intelligence was gathered, my initial strategic objectives were secured, and my local assets were primed. It was time to escalate from a defensive posture to an offensive one. A civilian dispute of this nature, once it involves formal threats and financial demands, becomes a legal conflict. And in a legal conflict, you bring in a specialist. You hire a bigger gun. I had a name, provided by a former colleague from my days in the service. A man who had seen his share of contractual battles with government contractors. If you've got a petty tyrant drunk on bylaw power, he had told me over the phone, you call David Chen. Retired JAG, eats HOAs for breakfast. He thinks of it as a public service. I called Chen's office. His assistant was polite but guarded, a professional gatekeeper. I didn't try to bluster my way through. I was concise. My name is Arthur Morgan. I am a retired Army colonel. I have a property dispute with a homeowners association that is attempting to assert jurisdiction where none exists. I have compiled a preliminary intelligence dossier. The phrase intelligence dossier must have been the correct password. I had an appointment for the following afternoon. David Chen's office was not what I expected. It was in a modest, restored brick building downtown, not a high-rise glass tower. The man himself was lean, sharp, and had a restless energy that belied his graying hair. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, but his eyes were those of a field officer, constantly assessing, calculating. He wasted no time on pleasantries. "Colonel Morgan," he said with a firm handshake. "David Chen. My old CO speaks highly of you. Says you build things to last. What's the situation?" Instead of launching into the story, I simply placed the black binder on his polished mahogany desk. The label, Operation Spring Freedom, was facing him. A slow smile spread across his face. "I like you already, Colonel." He opened the binder. For the next 20 minutes he was silent, save for the soft rustle of paper as he turned the plastic-sleeved pages. He examined the initial violation notice. He studied the highlighted copy of the CC and RS. He spent a long time looking at the county plat maps and the drainage easement document. He read the notes I had taken from my conversations with Mrs. Gable and the Martinezes. When he got to the final page, which detailed my conversation with Ron from the DEP and listed the state's case number, he let out a soft laugh. "My God, Colonel," he said, closing the binder. "This isn't a dossier, it's a kill box. You've built a perfect, legally inescapable kill box." He leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen on his desk. "Most clients come in here with a shoebox full of angry letters and a lot of righteous indignation. You've come in with a fully prepared prosecution. You've established she has no jurisdiction, that she's violating her own procedures, and that she's attempting to force you to commit a crime against the state. This is beautiful." "So what's our next move?" I asked. "Our next move is to give her more rope," Chen said, his eyes gleaming with tactical delight. "We don't go for the throat. Not yet. We let her walk deeper into the trap. We're going to draft a letter. A polite, professional, terrifying letter." He swiveled to his computer. "It will be addressed to her and to each member of the board, personally. It will calmly state the facts as you've laid them out here. It will reference the specific county plat records that prove your property is exempt. It will cite the state environmental code she is demanding you violate. It will provide the DEP case number and the name of the agent in charge. And then it will inform them that any further communication, threats, or attempts to trespass will be met with a lawsuit seeking damages for tortious interference, harassment, and conspiracy, for which they will all be held personally and financially liable, as their actions fall well outside the protections of their board insurance." He paused, looking at me. "We're not just firing a warning shot, Colonel. We're painting a target on each and every one of them. We're making this personal. We want the weaker board members to start sweating. We want them to understand that their little tin pot queen is about to cost them their savings." "And what do you expect her reaction will be?" I asked. "A rational person would retreat, apologize, and pray we don't sue," Chen said with a grin. "But based on your profile of the subject, she's going to escalate. She's too arrogant not to. She'll see this as a challenge to her authority, and when she makes her next move, it will be her last." The letter was sent via certified mail, return receipt requested, to Karen Miller and the 4 other members of the Creekwood Estates Board. A paper trail for every step. Now, we waited. The battlefield was prepared. The enemy had been warned. The next move was hers. The response to David Chen's legal countersalvo was, for nearly a week, a profound and telling silence. The certified mail receipts came back, signed. They had received the warning. They knew we were armed. In a conventional engagement, this is the point where de-escalation begins. But I was not dealing with a conventional opponent. I was dealing with a petty tyrant, and the one thing a tyrant cannot abide is a challenge to their absolute authority. As Chen predicted, Karen Miller did not retreat. She escalated. But she did it in a way that revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of the battlefield. She thought the fight was still about her rules, her authority. She didn't grasp that I had shifted the conflict to an entirely different arena, one governed by state laws and property rights, where her CC and Rs were meaningless. Her blunder came not in the form of a letter, but in direct action. It was a Tuesday morning. I was in my workshop, cleaning and oiling a set of antique woodworking tools, when I heard the rumble of a heavy diesel engine coming up my long gravel driveway. This was unusual. I wasn't expecting any deliveries. I walked to the door and looked out. A large dump truck and trailer rig from a company called Acme Landscaping and Earthworks was pulling to a stop 100 yards from my house near the spring. Behind it, like a malevolent pilot fish, was Karen Miller's golf cart. I felt a surge, not of anger, but of grim satisfaction. This was it, the critical error, the overreach from which there is no recovery. I picked up two things before I walked outside. The first was my phone. I started it recording video, holding it casually at my side. The second was the Operation Spring Freedom Binder. I walked calmly toward the crew. A foreman, a burly man in a sweat-stained shirt, was getting out of the truck. Karen was already out of her cart, pointing a finger toward my spring with an air of command. "Right there," she was telling the foreman. "You're going to build a 6-foot-high earthen berm. Block it off completely, all the way to the fence line." The foreman looked from the spring to my approaching figure, a flicker of uncertainty on his face. This was clearly not the tidy suburban lawn he was used to working on. "Good morning," I said, my voice even and calm. I addressed the foreman, ignoring Karen completely. "Can I help you?" "Got a work order here from the HOA, pal," the foreman said, trying for a tone of authority. "Gotta build a berm." "You're on private property," I stated simply. "This is not part of the Creekwood Estates HOA. You are trespassing." Karen stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "I told you, he's a nutcase. He doesn't own this part. It's common runoff area. I am the president of the board, and I am ordering you to proceed." The foreman hesitated. He was caught between a paying customer and a man who looked and sounded like he knew exactly what he was talking about. "Sir," I said to the foreman, opening the binder, "let me make this very simple for you and your company. This," I said, pointing to the first page, "is a certified copy of the county plat map. As you can see, this entire parcel is my property. This," I said, turning the page, "is a copy of the State Environmental Code regarding the protection of natural water sources. What she is ordering you to do, block it off completely, is a Class 1 environmental crime. The fines for your company would start at $25,000. This," I turned another page, "is the case number from the State Department of Environmental Protection, which has already opened an investigation into this matter. And this," I said, holding up my phone, "is a video recording of you on my property being instructed to commit a felony." I paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. Then I delivered the final payload. "I have a lawyer, David Chen, who is a specialist in this field. If your men or your equipment so much as disturb a single blade of grass from this point forward, he will not only file for an immediate injunction against your company, but he will also name you, personally, in a civil suit for damages and conspiracy. I suggest you call your boss." The foreman's bravado evaporated. His face went pale. He looked from the binder to my phone, to the furious face of Karen Miller, and the gears of self-preservation began to turn. He pulled out his own phone and walked a few paces away. Karen was sputtering. "This is outrageous! You can't— I am the authority here!" I did not engage. I simply stood there, a silent sentinel with an open binder. The foreman's call was short. He came back, his face grim. "All right, pack it up," he yelled to his crew, who had been watching the drama unfold from the truck. "We're out of here." He turned to me. "Sorry for the trouble, mister. We were told this was all HOA common land." "You were misinformed," I said. "You made the right decision." He nodded and climbed back into his truck without a backward glance at Karen. The crew, moving with surprising speed, loaded their equipment. Within 5 minutes, the big diesel engine rumbled back to life, and the truck retreated down my driveway, leaving a cloud of dust and a single, incandescently furious HOA president. "You will regret this," she shrieked at me, her voice cracking with impotent rage. "I will ruin you. I will bury you in lawyers and fines." I just looked at her. I didn't say a word. I let the video on my phone keep rolling, capturing her meltdown. Finally, defeated, she threw herself back into her golf cart and sped away. I stopped the recording. I now had documented irrefutable proof of her trespass, her attempted violation of state law, and her direct threats. She had walked straight into the kill box, and the gate had just slammed shut behind her. But the day wasn't over. Her blunder had created a fracture not just in her legal position, but within her own command structure. That evening, I received a phone call from a blocked number. "Is this Arthur Morgan?" a nervous, reedy voice asked. "It is. My name is Frank Peterson. I'm the treasurer of the Creekwood Estates HOA." He sounded terrified. "I was on the email chain for that landscaping company. I saw the invoice. And I just got a call from Karen. She was screaming. She wants the board to authorize a special fund to hire a big litigation firm to sue you." "I see," I said, listening. "Look," Frank rushed on, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm a retired accountant. I just took this gig to help the neighborhood. I don't want any part of this. What you said, what your lawyer's letter said about personal liability, is that real?" "Absolutely," I confirmed. "Board insurance does not cover illegal acts. You vote to support her. You are personally on the hook." There was a long, shaky sigh on the other end of the line. "That's what I was afraid of. Listen, I can't be part of this. There's stuff going on with the money, with the beautification fund she controls. I've tried to ask questions, but she shuts me down." He was the inside source, the defector, the conscience-stricken subordinate who holds the keys to the kingdom. "What do you want, Frank?" I asked. "I want out," he said desperately. "And I want to make this right. I have the passwords to the accounting software. The real software, not the sanitized reports she gives the board. I can get you everything. The bank statements, the vendor payments, all of it." "Send it," I said. "Send it all to my lawyer, David Chen, anonymously if you must. He will know what to do with it." "I will," Frank said, a note of profound relief in his voice. "Thank you." He hung up. I stood in my quiet study, the binder on my desk. The final phase of the operation was now in motion. Karen Miller's tactical blunder with the landscapers had given me the video evidence I needed. Now, her strategic mistreatment of her own treasurer was about to give me the financial kill shot. The war would be over soon. The data dump from Frank the treasurer was even more damning than I could have imagined. He sent a password-protected file to David Chen, who immediately shared it with me. It was the complete, unvarnished financial history of the Creekwood Estates HOA for the past 3 years, a digital ledger of Karen Miller's corruption. Chen and I spent a long evening on a conference call, going through the files line by line. It was a classic case of petty embezzlement, dressed up in bureaucratic camouflage. The beautification fund was her personal slush fund. There were regular 4-figure payments to a consulting firm named Aesthetic Solutions, LLC. A quick search of state business records revealed the sole proprietor of Aesthetic Solutions was one Karen P. Miller. She was paying herself with HOA money for consulting, on which non-regulation bird baths to fine. There were more direct thefts as well. Payments to a high-end catering company for board meetings that never happened. Reimbursements for legal research that corresponded with spa weekends listed on her social media. And, most damningly, she had used HOA funds to pay a lawyer to send threatening letters to Mrs. Gable over her birdbath. A clear case of using community money to fund a personal vendetta. "This is it," Chen said, his voice grim but excited. "This is the kill shot. We have her on breach of fiduciary duty, embezzlement, and wire fraud. This moves beyond a civil matter, Arthur. This is criminal." "What's the plan?" I asked. "The annual HOA meeting is next week," he said. "It's the perfect venue, a public forum. We don't just want to win. We want to dismantle her power structure completely. We need to liberate the entire community." The strategy we devised was a coordinated, multi-front assault, designed to unfold in stages during the public meeting. I would lead with my own case, establishing the pattern of illegal overreach. Then, we would bring in the insurgency, the other victimized residents, to show this wasn't an isolated incident. Finally, we would deploy the financial evidence as the coup de grâce, turning the entire community against her and the board that enabled her. I spent the next few days preparing my troops. I met again with Mrs. Gable and the Martinezes. I showed them a summary of my case, the maps, the letter from the DEP. I didn't show them the financial data. That was our trump card, to be played at the decisive moment. But I told them I had uncovered evidence that would make it impossible for Karen to continue. "She is going to try to shout you down," I told them, using the tone of a pre-mission briefing. "She will say you are out of order. Do not engage. Simply state your facts. Tell your story. I will handle the rest. All you need to do is speak your truth." "Can you do that?" Mrs. Gable, who had been so timid before, straightened her shoulders. She took my husband's memory and tried to find me for it. "Yes, Colonel, I can do that." Carlos Martinez clenched his fist. "She made my son cry over a plastic slide. I'll be there, and I'll speak." The night of the annual meeting arrived. The venue was the community clubhouse, a sterile, soulless room with beige walls, fluorescent lighting, and uncomfortable stacking chairs. The air was thick with a mixture of stale coffee and suburban anxiety. The room was packed, far more so than usual. Word had spread. Something was going to happen. I took a seat in the back row with David Chen beside me. He was not there in his official capacity as my lawyer, but simply as a guest of a resident, a Trojan horse inside the gates. Mrs. Gable and the Martinezes sat near the front, a small, nervous pocket of resistance. The meeting began. Karen Miller, Flanked by her 4 board members at a long table, presided. Frank the treasurer sat at the far end, looking pale and avoiding everyone's gaze. Karen was in her element, wielding a small wooden gavel like a scepter. She droned on about landscaping contracts and pool maintenance schedules, her voice oozing self-congratulation. Finally, she reached the end of her agenda. "That concludes the board's report. Is there any new business from the floor?" she asked, a perfunctory question she clearly expected no answer to. This was the moment. I stood up. "Yes," I said, my voice carrying easily through the quiet room. "I have new business." All heads turned. Karen's eyes narrowed. "State your name for the record." "My name is Arthur Morgan. My property abuts this community to the west." "You are not a member of this association," she snapped, her hand tightening on the gavel. "You have no standing to speak." "According to your own bylaws, Section 3, Paragraph 2, I replied, my voice like ice. "Non-member residents affected by board actions may be heard during new business, and I have been profoundly affected by this board's actions." She was momentarily stunned that I had quoted her own scripture back at her. Chen had found the loophole. She couldn't shut me down without violating her own procedure in front of the entire community. "Fine," she spat. "You have 3 minutes." "I won't need that long," I said. I walked to the front of the room. I had brought a small, portable projector. I set it up and aimed it at the blank wall behind the board members. The first image that appeared was the county plat map, with my property outlined in red. "This is my property," I began, my voice calm and authoritative, like a lecturer addressing a class. "As confirmed by the county, it is not, and has never been, part of Creekwood Estates. Despite this, for the past month, I have been subjected to a campaign of harassment and illegal threats by this board, led by its president, Karen Miller." I clicked to the next slide, a high-resolution scan of the violation notice. Gasps rippled through the crowd as they saw the $1,750 demand. I was ordered to illegally destroy a natural spring, a protected state water resource. When I refused, I was issued this fraudulent fine. Click. The next image was a shot from the video I had taken, showing the Acme landscaping truck on my property. When I continued to refuse, Mrs. Miller, using HOA funds, hired a work crew to trespass on my land, to commit what the Department of Environmental Protection calls a Class 1 environmental crime. Click. A close-up of Karen's face contorted in rage from that same video. When her attempt failed, she threatened to ruin me. I turned off the projector and faced the crowd. This was not an administrative error. This was a deliberate, illegal abuse of power. And I have learned that I am not her only victim. I looked toward the front row. "Mrs. Gable, would you care to share your experience with the board's beautification standards?" Mrs. Gable, trembling but resolute, stood up. "She made me get rid of my husband's bird bath," she said, her voice cracking but clear. "She fined me $200. It was all I had left of him." A murmur of sympathy and anger went through the room. "Mr. Martinez?" I prompted. Carlos stood. "She fined us $500 because our kid's play set was too colorful. She runs this neighborhood like a prison camp." The murmuring grew louder. People were nodding, whispering to their neighbors. The foundation of Karen's power, the illusion that everyone else agreed with her, was crumbling in real time. Karen banged her toy gavel. "This is not a forum for personal grievances. You are all out of order." But it was too late. The dam of fear had broken. "Now," I said, my voice cutting through the noise, "let's talk about how these vendettas are funded." I turned the projector back on. The first image was a screenshot of the HOA's accounting ledger. The line item for Aesthetic Solutions, LLC, was highlighted in yellow. This is the HOA's beautification fund. As you can see, it pays a substantial monthly consulting fee to a company called Aesthetic Solutions. Click. The next slide was the state registration for the LLC. The owner's name was clearly visible: Karen P. Miller. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was the sound of dawning comprehension, of betrayal made manifest. She has been paying herself with your money to harass you, I stated flatly. I clicked through more slides, showing the catering bills, the personal legal fees paid from the HOA account. It was a methodical, undeniable vivisection of her corruption. Karen was on her feet now, her face a mottled mask of purple and red. These are lies. Fabricated documents. Frank, the treasurer, at the end of the table, finally broke. He stood up, his hands shaking. They're not fabricated, he said, his voice barely a whisper, but it carried in the stunned silence. It's all true. I gave him the files. I couldn't be a part of it anymore. That was the final blow, the confession from within. The room erupted, not in chaos, but in a unified wave of cold fury directed at the woman at the head of the table. This was Chen's cue. He stood up, and his sharp, lawyerly voice cut through the din. My name is David Chen. I am here as a guest of Colonel Morgan. I would advise the residents here of two things. First, the evidence of embezzlement you see here is more than sufficient for a criminal referral to the district attorney's office. Second, under the terms of your own insurance, the personal and legal liability for these actions falls squarely on the board members who approved them. The HOA's funds cannot be used to defend them. In fact, any money spent on Mrs. Miller's failed attempt to hire landscapers must be repaid, likely via a special assessment on all of you. He let that sink in. The idea that they would have to pay for her crimes was the final straw. Therefore, Chen continued, I would suggest a motion is in order. I stepped forward again. I so move, I declared, my voice ringing with finality. I move for a vote of no confidence and the immediate removal of Karen Miller and the entire complicit board of directors. I second the motion, Carlos Martinez yelled from the crowd. Karen banged the gavel, a frantic, pathetic rhythm. This is an illegal meeting. I do not recognize this motion. This meeting is adjourned. But no one was listening to her anymore. Her power had evaporated. All in favor of the motion to remove the board? I called out. The response was a deafening, cathartic roar. Aye! It was nearly unanimous, a tidal wave of voices reclaiming their community. All opposed? Silence. Only Karen Miller stood there, her mouth open, her face a portrait of utter defeat. Her 4 board members were already sinking in their chairs, trying to become invisible. The motion carries, I said into the silence. Mrs. Miller, you are relieved. For a long moment, she just stared, unable to process her public humiliation. Then, with a choked sob, she grabbed her purse, stumbled away from the table, and fled the room. The reign of the petty tyrant was over. The aftermath of the coup was swift and decisive. In the vacuum left by Karen's spectacular implosion, the community moved with an efficiency born of shared liberation. An immediate motion was made from the floor to elect an interim board. Frank, the treasurer, looking like a man who had just been granted a pardon, was nominated and accepted on the condition that he would oversee a full, independent forensic audit. Carlos Martinez was nominated and accepted, promising to immediately abolish the approved aesthetic lists. A retired schoolteacher, a woman known for her fairness, was also elected. Their first act as the new interim board was to unanimously pass a motion. Carlos Martinez read it aloud, his voice filled with satisfaction. The interim board of Creekwood Estates formally voids all outstanding fines and violations issued by the previous board. We offer a formal public apology to Colonel Arthur Morgan for the harassment he endured, and thank him for his service to this community. And finally, we declare the play set, the bird bath, and the basketball hoop to be welcome and cherished additions to our neighborhood. A round of applause, genuine and warm, filled the room. The following day, David Chen, armed with the binder and Frank's complete data file, met with an investigator from the district attorney's office. A formal criminal investigation into Karen Miller was opened. The charges were fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Faced with irrefutable evidence and zero support, she was eventually forced to sell her beige house to pay for her legal defense and the restitution ordered by the court. Her name on the community's lips became a cautionary tale, a ghost of tyranny past. The change in Creekwood Estates was almost immediate. It was as if a low-grade fever had broken. The oppressive atmosphere of fear and suspicion evaporated, replaced by a tentative but growing sense of relief and unity. Brightly colored flowers appeared in gardens that had been monochrome. Children's laughter, once a sound to be policed, echoed in the streets. Mrs. Gable's bird bath was reinstalled in a place of honor by her rose bushes, and the Martinez's colorful playset was reassembled, a vibrant flag of freedom in their backyard. A few weeks later, the Martinez's hosted a neighborhood barbecue. They insisted I be the guest of honor. I was reluctant. My war was over, and I desired only a return to my peace. But I understood the symbolic importance. I walked over the hill from my farm and was greeted not as an outsider, but as a liberator. People I didn't know shook my hand, thanking me. Mrs. Gable gave me a hug, tears of gratitude in her eyes. Frank, the treasurer, looking 10 years younger, handed me a beer and told me the audit was proceeding smoothly. I did not stay long. I accepted their thanks, shared a meal, and then quietly slipped away as the party was in full swing, making my way back to the familiar quiet of my own land. My part was done. The Republic had been restored. It was time for the Cincinnatus to return to his plow. Later that evening, I stood by the spring. The water bubbled up from the earth, cool and constant, indifferent to the petty dramas of humankind. It flowed freely into the creek, which meandered through the woods, its gentle burble the only sound in the deepening twilight. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. The peace was profound, absolute. It was the same peace I had known before, but it felt different now. Deeper, hard-won. I went back to my study. I took the black binder, Operation Spring Freedom, from my desk. Its job was done. It was a weapon that no longer needed to be wielded. I didn't destroy it. I placed it on a high shelf in a closet, a dusty archive of a short, necessary war. A reminder that peace is not a passive state. It's not a garden you inherit. It's a fortress you must be willing to defend. Sometimes, even in the quietest corners of the world, a stand must be taken against the encroaching tide of petty tyranny, not with anger or violence, but with truth, discipline, and the quiet, unyielding power of a well-documented file. The kingdom was quiet once more, and this time the peace felt permanent.